After smoothing the major lumps with the wood mallet, we're of course going to check the fit again. As long as we're happy with that and we don't feel like there need to be big changes, then we want to keep working on that finish. If all I had was a ball peen hammer, of course that would be acceptable for hitting on the outside of the panel, and I would want to support the workpiece with a hard object behind, perhaps an automotive dolly. Like here's an example, a really inexpensive one from a kit. So I just want to place an object like that behind the contour, and then I'm compressing the aluminum against that with a flat-faced hammer. That would be one option. I like a bigger tool face. This is a spoon. I made it from a leaf spring, automotive leaf spring. I can go into more detail about how to make your own spoons later. So I would use the flat one on the outside. I've made a curved face spoon to hit from the back side if necessary. It's about I think a 1.5 or 2 inch radius across there. The benefit of these tools is that they spread the blow over a really large area, so they don't leave any or less likely to leave marks. Another option, of course, would be a body hammer. You'd want to use the flat face on the outside. If you're hitting it on the back side of the panel, then you would use a hammer face that matches that curvature, and then you'd support the outside with a steel dolly, like a flat steel dolly. If I'm hitting on the outside of the panel, I want a curved dolly behind there, and at this phase we're going to be compressing that metal to get the finish nicer and more smooth. So some things to look for. Of course, if I noticed any rubbing on the inside in here, I stretch that. But the other thing to note is on this piece, I have a gap over here on the side. You can see one of my original shrink marks. What that gap is telling me here is that I just have too much material. And if I could turn some of that length into thickness, this piece ought to go just right down against the model. If I had, or well, I do have, but if you have a shrinking tool, say the hand operated or kick operated shrinking tools, the Eastwoods are well known, but those certainly aren't the only ones out there. That kind of tool would work really well in this situation, but I'm proceeding with this project with the understanding that if you didn't have any tools, what would you do? So I will anneal the area that I want to put a tuck. I might do one or two here, but I'm going to anneal that spot and shrink it with a small tuck, let's say only about this high, and we'll see how that does. So the area that I shrunk in the middle is better. I did one tuck right there. Then I need to get the perimeter fitting snugly all the way around, and then we'll know we're ready to move on. I spent about an hour planishing this, either hitting from the backside against a steel surface with a hammer, or putting a dolly behind the on the back side of the panel and then hitting it from the top side, and it fits nice, and the surface definitely looks handmade, but this is where if you had a wheeling machine you could do this in, oh my gosh, a fraction of the time. But if you don't and you wanted to do it by hand, that's how you could do it. Let's move on to the next panel. Here's a side panel. I put a stop against the rear of the model because that works so well on the first panel. Remember, the point of that is to help us make sure that every time I check the piece I'm making on the model, it's in the same place. So I'll just butt the metal up against this guide each time I check it. I've marked out areas that seem like obvious places to shrink. I've left a little bit extra back here in this void. Also on the front where the grill fits, I left enough material there for a flange in case I use the same grill. I'm not really sure what I'll do about that yet. I've left enough overlap with the top piece. So here's the first piece I made over here. The bottom of that piece came to this tape line. This side piece I'll make large enough to come to this other side of the tape line, so I'll have some overlap there. I know I'm going to need some overlap for riveting, but it's just a lot easier to have too much than not enough. Just for the heck of it, let's take a look at this side panel to see how much shape is in here. So I'm taking a straight edge and I'm just checking to see how much it rocks from one side to the other. That's telling me how much crown is in this panel. You can see it's quite a bit. Here we are after the first round of shrinking. Now I'll stretch the center to raise it up. Similar to the situation on the last panel, I find myself wanting to shrink just a little bit along this edge to pull that down. I'm going to show you the tool that is very commonly used for this process in case you're not familiar with it, and then I'll show you how to do it if you don't have the tool. I usually refer to these as Lancaster style shrinking and stretching tools from the 1930s patent from Lancaster, Pennsylvania that they're based on. They're sold all over the place, but and they're not that expensive. But in case you don't have this tool, let me show you another way to shrink. So here's a way to shrink if you don't have the tool that everyone seems to have. I have notched the edge of my stump here. I've marked off the areas where I'd like to do a little shrinking. And I'm going to take a hammer with kind of a cross chisel face. It wouldn't matter if it were oriented vertically. It's just it needs to be a long and skinny type face. And I'm going to hit that once each time over that little void, and it's going to create a series of wrinkles, which I will then anneal just the wrinkle, and I'll be able to better trap that soft metal into the stump and shrink it. After hammering down those wrinkles, that really pulled this side down in well. I didn't have to stretch this piece that much in this center area, just a little bit, which I could identify by scratches that showed up on the back side. I spent about an hour planishing this. It definitely looks handmade and kind of quaint. The shrinking areas still show up as marks, but I'm okay with that. I'm having a lot of fun. This is really good therapy if you're trapped at home. It gives you an appreciation for how cars were built by hand back in the day. I'm ready to move on to the bottom panel. Here's the bottom panel of the track nose. Let's take a look at how much shape is here. We've got a little bit of crown this way, and then it gets, of course there's a pretty precipitous drop over there at the edges and along the front. So that's how we'll know where we're headed. Here's a look at the paper pattern for the bottom panel of the track nose. This is the bottom panel, and as I've marked it off, this is an insane amount of stretching to try to do with hand tools. I might be biting off more than I can chew at this point, but what the heck, let's just see what happens. I'm going to approach it a little bit differently. I'm going to situate this area next to the edge of a depression in my stump. This is my medieval cereal bowl. I do have other versions of stumps, but I'm just going to go with this one here. This could be better if it were even just a little bit deeper. And what's going to happen as I drive this part of the panel down and stretch it, I'll be getting wrinkles that form around the outside where I want it to shrink. A wrinkle is a wrinkle is a wrinkle, whether I put it in with a tucking tool or whether I force it to come up because of where I'm hammering the panel in relation to the stump. So I'll be stretching this part. Wrinkles will form on the outside. I'll shrink those. I'll probably have to anneal it and do additional shrinking, but let's see how it goes.